There are only two parties with any kind of momentum in Britain right now. You've got Reform, who are leading in the polls, and they've been leading for a very long time. And you've got the Greens, who are surging in the polls, even if not yet at the level of Reform. Well, leaders from both parties went head-to-head on Question Time this week. Zack Polanski from the Greens. And of course, he's not the leader of Reform, but I think probably the second most important person in Reform after Nigel Farage, Zia Yusuf.
I'm afraid I'm going to mention immigration because it is, according to the latest YouGov poll, the number one issue for ordinary British people, for voters across this great country. Of course, it's not the only issue. I couldn't agree with that more. And as someone, by the way, who's a second-generation immigrant, whose parents came to this country in the early 1980s, and I'd like to think have contributed. They're given half a century of service between them to the NHS. I know how much immigrants have contributed, but it is absolutely true that there has been far too much mass immigration in this country. It has been to the detriment of this country. We've had enormous numbers. The Tories are most culpable for that, but I'm afraid the Labour government are frankly pouring gasoline on that problem.
Zia, do you ever think it's the number one problem because you spend a lot of time spreading misinformation and fear to make it?
So that intervention from Zack went down well in the room. I think it's a good point. You know, when people say people really care about this is the number one issue in the country. It's like, well, is it? Do you have something to do with that? You know, it's a bit self-fulfilling, isn't it? You talk about immigration so much that it then becomes the number one topic, and then you say, well, the reason we're talking about it so much is because it's the number one topic. As I say, that intervention from Zack appeared to go down well in the room. And he and Zia Yusuf went on to have an extended head-to-head.
You just accused me of spreading misinformation. Please tell me, and the people watching at home, what is it that I just said?
Because you've said the first bit, which is correct, that we don't have enough prison spaces, that we don't have enough NHS beds, and that we don't have investment in our communities. What immigrant has taken away those resources, as opposed to those resources being funded? So you can't blame austerity on one hand, but then say it's the immigrants. The immigrants haven't caused austerity. The same Thatcherite policies that you and your party support, and the Conservatives, of what have caused the devastation in this country. And you should take responsibility for that too.
Do you think that 6.5 million net new people arriving inside 14 years, 11 million gross new people arriving in this country, against the wishes of the British people, by the way, who voted against such things in 4 consecutive elections, you tell me, you don't think that's going to put pressure on public services?
Well, first of all, we were told Brexit would bring down immigration. Actually, what it's done is brought up immigration.
And you can blame the Tories for that.
So there was a mess that Nigel Farage started with that when he gave misinformation
I
to the
don't
public.
believe Nigel Farage was in government for those 14 years.
Oh, yeah, I think he was pretty around, though, and on Question Time quite.
He was not in government, I'm afraid.
Big row there. That row, though, is nothing compared to what happened later in the show.
You absolutely are a fascist. You're from a far-right party. Right. You're Nigel Farage.
Let's just be clear about that.
Hang on, Zia, wait. I'm going to let Zack talk, and then I'm going to let you come in. No, wait a minute.
Your concern about Muslims extends only so much as they agree with your political opinion.
I realise he's made an allegation. I'm going to let Zack talk, and then I'm going to let you respond.
Let's bring the receipts. Nigel Farage, he joined forces with the Swedish Democrats in the European Parliament. This is a far-right Nazi group. They want to deport people, not based on the colour of his skin, but from the places that they've come from. They also, Nigel Farage talked about it being the end of democracy because of the way certain ethnic minorities are voting. These aren't robust words, as Annabelle called them earlier, or we've heard on the conversation. This is racism, it's fascism, and we should call it out.
Zia.
Okay, so what we want to do is deport people on the basis of whether they are legally entitled to be in this country. That has nothing to do with race, ethnicity, nor religion. Now let's talk. You accused me earlier, let alone fascist. You said that I was peddling disinformation. And I think people watching this program at home, given the Green Party are right now, to be fair, they're surging in the polls. It's important that people know this. When Zack Polanski is making seductive claims to you, it's important that you understand, before he came into politics, he literally made money by charging women on the promise that he could literally enlarge the size of their breasts by hypnotizing them. That is a true statement. And by the way, if you think that's insane, his policies are even more insane. He wants a world without borders. He wants open borders. He wants us to stand down and destroy our nuclear deterrent as Vladimir Putin belligerently marauds into Ukraine. He wants a communist economic system. He wants to legalize all drugs. And in Zack Polanski's version of Britain, his version of Britain, it is legal to sell fentanyl, crack cocaine, and heroin, but illegal to rent your flat out. This is the most unserious person to enter British politics in my life.
And what I want to ask Zia, if we're talking about people's past records, Nathan Gill, this is a man who was found guilty on bribery with the Russian state. Now, Zia said that Nigel Farage and Reform did not know who this man was. But Nigel Farage, including the day after Brexit happened, was pictured with 4 men behind him. One of them being former MEP for Reform, Nathan Gill. The man that Zia says, no one knows who he was. So were you lying, or was Nigel Farage lying?
Zack, I'm afraid, if you want to use the word lie, let's be clear about something. You are lying. What I said is I have never met. I took over as chairman in the summer of last year. I will tell you, I have never met Nathan Gill in my life.
So, there's quite a lot of context required there, really, to the argument. So you probably already know about the hypnotherapy boob job story. Zack has repeatedly apologized for it. I did actually read the Sun article this morning, and the woman he hypnotized, according to the Sun, her chest did get 2 inches larger. This is not me endorsing boob hypnosis, but that's what the Sun article said. The Nathan Gill story is a newer one. He is a former Reform MEP who last month admitted taking bribes to make statements in favor of Russia while being a member of the European Parliament. So that is very, very corrupt. And between December 2018 and July 2019, Gill took money from Oleg Voloshin in exchange for making pro-Russian statements in the European Parliament and in the media. Yusuf had previously tried to say that Gill was not close to Farage or anyone of significance in Reform. The Byline Times presents a different narrative. So they say, in fact, Gill and Farage were thick as thieves, with insiders telling them that Gill was one of Farage's closest aides. And they unearthed quite a good quote, actually, from Farage in 2016. He was backing Gill to be UKIP's leader in Wales. And he said, "I have worked with Nathan Gill over a period of years, and he's been terrific. He's never, ever let me down. He's as honest as the day is long." A short day, a midwinter day, maybe. Curtis, I suppose, there probably wasn't a clear winner in the sort of rows they were having, taking chunks out of each other. But one thing you definitely could say is that the audience were only really listening to 2 people on that stage. I can never get the whole way through an episode of Question Time, but I watched a fair amount of it. And no one would have really noticed that the Labour person or the Tory person was there. There was also a right-wing journalist, but it basically was all about the Greens and Reform as the 2 parties with momentum, with energy, who seem to have something to say.
That's a good thing. That's what you want. You want to see look, obviously we don't want to endorse Reform or boost their politics, but they are leading in the polls. They have a presence. So you kind of want to see the surge in the left rather than this sort of background noise of the Conservatives and the Labour Party. So I'm very happy that it was just between them 2. I think people were tuning in to see them 2, to see Zack Polanski. This was Zack's first test on Question Time, and I think he passed very well. Look, I mean, you can sort of agree or disagree on who won that particular exchange, but I can tell you something. The hypno boo job story, no one cares. They really, really don't. And people coming out and attacking me on this are like, yeah, the media ran that story when Zack became leader. No one's bothered anymore. Like, this is not the politics of 2015, 2016, right? People want solutions to problems. We have multiple crises in this country and globally, and people want to hear solutions. So when Zia Yusuf says about a hypno boob job thing, people aren't really listening. But the Russian story, well, that's a real big kicker for Reform. That's probably their only biggest weakness. I mean, they have a lot of weakness in policy areas, but in terms of rhetoric and how they're seen through the lens of the media, I think that's a real sticking point for them. And Zack really has been the only one who's majorly attacked Reform on this. Not surprised that the Conservatives haven't really attacked Reform on it, because they took loads of money from Russian oligarchs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was in 2018 when Jeremy Corbyn called out. And there were many in the press going, "Oh, don't play political football with this." And again, it's funny when people sort of labelled Jeremy as sort of pro-Russia when he was one calling it out. But I think this is a bigger win for Zack because he got a lot of his talking points in there. On the terms of whether like Zia is a fascist or a fascist political party, that's maybe a debate. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But I think getting that word in there, framing the debate is very, very helpful for Zack. Now, when you're the leader of the Labour Party, or I say they're a major party only because they're in government. They won't be for much longer. There is a kind of a balancing act. You do have to be a little bit careful with what you call people because you're trying to win the majority of people over. The Green Party are in a very unique and good position, which is that they're not trying to get a majority in government. They're trying to win 30, 40, maybe even 50 seats, which will be a huge win if they get that. They're not trying to win a majority, so they can be a bit more, they have a bit more room to sort of say what they really want to say. And they can come out with things that the majority of people might disagree. I mean, if you were to poll people, is Nigel Farage a fascist? I would suspect that majority would probably say no. That doesn't really matter. They didn't really get to the heart of the debate when it comes to abolish landlords. I know that Zia Yusuf said, you want to have legalization of drugs, but you want to make renting out illegal. Of course, that's not true. But I think that the abolishing landlords thing, even though the policies within it isn't strictly abolishing landlords, that gets headlines, that reframes the debate. And I think that's the main thing for the Green Party. You need to push the Overton window to the left or back to the left and dominate the narrative. I'm very glad, that Zack's new sort of leadership style, which I think the Green Party's been too technocratic for too long, his new eco-populist style is working. We're seeing, the rise in the polls. We're seeing the fact that they've hit 95,000 members, could be more. That's the last time I've seen it. Could be 100,000. Is that it's not to try and respond to every single lie from Reform Party, but just to come back with your own narrative. It could have been easily sort of Zack being bogged down trying to fight off the fact that they have a communist economic policy or they want open borders. Neither of these things are true, by the way. Even the Green Party, which is still a social democratic party, isn't calling for open borders. The left are not calling for open borders. They're just saying, don't blame everything on migrants, right? Two different things, but of course, it's in Reform's interest to push that lie. When you accept their framing and try and bat away those individual lies, the entire debate is on immigration. Zack, on the other hand, said, look, it's austerity, it's public services. I'm not going to engage in that debate. Here's what we need to do. And that's very effective. So I'm trying to be objective here, take my left-wing hat off for a second and see how they really came across. I think it matters, when you're playing the game on whose terms. So if Reform are speaking and they're talking about immigration, they're going to come out on top. That's their terrain. And when the left or progressives talk about immigration, either try and just argue against their framing of it or even capitulate to it, like Keir Starmer, I know he's not a progressive, then you're winning on their terms. If you reframe the debate, which is what Zack is doing, which is economic equality, wealth taxes, public ownership, by the way, then you're winning. So I do think objectively, again, it was only one question time performance. I think Zack probably came out as the winner here. And a lot of the attacks from Zia Yusuf didn't land. Even the hit no boob story, no one cared about it. So I think Zack needs to keep on pushing. He also needs to be aggressive, which I think he kind of was on that night. Don't wait to be attacked. Go for the attack. It's what we need in a left-wing leader. No more Mr. Nice Guy, shall we say. Someone to go out there, be aggressive, set the tone of the debate. And I think Zack did that pretty well.